Hello, my name's Geoff Kersey, and in this programme I'm going to show you how to paint this little country lane in the Peak District. So as you can see, I've transferred the tracing onto the sheet of £140 rough watercolour paper, ready to start painting. The first thing I need to do is to mask out certain areas with some masking fluid. I'm going to put the masking fluid, first of all, along this line in the middle distance where we've got an old dry stone wall. Now there's also on this left hand side of the picture quite a few fence posts, and the way these gradually get smaller as they go into the scene helps to create that feeling of perspective. For this next bit of masking fluid, I'm going to protect this area of the road. I want to make sure I've got a real splash of light there later on. And then for the last piece of masking fluid, I'm taking a number 10 brush full of clean water, and for the top of this hedgerow on the right, I'm just brushing all over it. Now while that's still wet, I'm taking a brush full of masking fluid and I'm just going to lay the masking fluid in and let it spread into the damp background. Just gives us a soft edge for the top of this hedgerow. Okay, and just before I finish with the masking fluid, I'll put a bit on this large tree on the left hand side. Now that stage is complete. We're just going to have to leave the masking fluid to dry before we move on to the next section. I've got a large number 16 brush and I'm just going to make a thin wash of cobalt blue with a little touch of rose madder added to it to warm it slightly. But before I put that on the paper, I'm going to wet the whole of the background using a 1-inch flat brush over the whole of the sky area to about 2/3 of the way down the piece of paper. Then I'm immediately picking up the wash and using the side of the brush, start to introduce that at the top of the scene. I'm going to try and leave 1 or 2 little areas of white paper to give the impression of cloud. And that's all I need to do for the sky. We'll leave it to dry. Well, now that that stage is dry, I'm going to mix some colour to paint the distant hills. I'm starting with the same colour as the sky, cobalt blue with a touch of rose madder. Slightly more rose madder this time to make it a little bit more purple. And I'm adding a little touch of burnt sienna to it to grey it slightly. Now while the hills are still wet, I need to be dropping in some colours to represent all the different bushes and trees. We'll have a bit more grey. I've got rose madder, cobalt blue and burnt sienna again, but this time that's quite a thicker, stronger mixture. I also want some green, so I'm going to take some Oriolin and put a touch of cobalt blue in it to make a nice bright green. I now want a nice rich brown, burnt sienna and cobalt blue. These colours now, as I mix each colour, it's a little bit stronger than the one that went before it. And finally, a bit of raw sienna and burnt sienna. Again, quite a strong mixture. So they're all mixed and ready. And I'm going to take the number 16 brush and start to put this background hill in. I think I'll thin that out slightly. I'll add a touch of water to that, make it a bit thinner. Coming right across the background. Working with this large number 16 brush so that I can work wet in wet. And then we'll add a little bit of the stronger version of that, the stronger greyer version. A little bit of the raw sienna and burnt sienna now, letting these colours work together and mix in the background. Coming right down to that masking fluid now at the right hand side. Then a touch of the brown, the stronger, darker brown. Strengthening the colour as we get nearer to the middle distance. I'm going to get a bit smaller brush now, and this is the Oriolin and cobalt blue. Working quite rapidly so I can take advantage of the still wet background. A touch more of the cobalt blue and burnt sienna, and I'm just emphasising the dark areas above the hedgerow and beyond where the road bends out of the scene there, just so I've got a nice contrast to have light on the tops of those a bit later on. Okay, so that stage is complete. Now that the paper's completely dry, straight on to the next stage, which is to take the number 10 brush again and the mixture of raw sienna and burnt sienna that I had before, and I'm going to use the side of the brush to indicate the tops of these wintry trees. It's important that you use the side of the brush so you just catch the surface and leave some bits of white paper showing through. And I'm now going to pick up a little bit of that purpley colour that I had on the distant hill. I've thinned it down with some water and I'm going to add a touch of that into the trees as well. Now that'll have to dry before we can do any more to the trees. For the next stage, I'm going to mix a sort of browny grey colour. Cobalt blue, rose madder and burnt sienna. And then with the liner writer brush, starting at this left-hand side, I'm going to put in some distant trees, keeping them nice and fine, really thin strokes of the brush. The beauty of this liner writer brush is that as it runs low on paint, the line becomes really fine. Important with something like this as well that we vary the shape and size of the trees and vary the distance apart that they are, or they can look a bit as though they've been lined up in a row. I'm now going to thin the paint out, just add some water to it, so I've got an even lighter tone of the same colour, and just put one or two more in a lighter tone so they sink even further back into the background. So it's now time to get rid of the first bit of masking fluid. I'm looking at this tree on the left hand side, and of course as soon as we take the masking fluid off it stands out like a sore thumb, but at least I've got some white paper that I can work into. So I'm going to take the detailer brush and get a bit of raw sienna with a little touch of burnt sienna. And I also need a dark brown, which I'm going to mix from burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Quite a thick mixture that, quite a dark, strong mixture. So I'll start by taking the raw sienna and burnt sienna and putting that light colour onto the white paper. Now I'm charging up the brush with the rich dark brown. As the tree comes out of the dark area, I'm making the branches darker, but keeping them lighter lower down. So we've really got light against dark, and then as we go up, we've got dark against light.